So I asked you to make a choice between these two futures. Tell us where we're going. And I also was trying to insist that Ingold, me, people, we shouldn't say, let's go back to, because it's not about going back, it's about going forward into something else. Nobody has an AI that they like, an AI buddy. Uh-oh. Huh? I use AI a ton. I've taken to liking AI a lot, but you have to have the right AI. This is my version. It's a thing. It's called Claude, which is put out by Anthropic. I'm obviously drawn to that being an anthro person, although it has pretty much nothing to do with anthropology or Claude Levi-Strauss, which I hoped for a while, but has nothing to do with that. But it is an interesting tool, and if you want good AI, you probably have to pay for it. So I won't tell you how much it costs, but this is my AI. And so I asked Claude this question about which way we are going this way or that way. I figured it'd be a good question to ask my AI. And it's told me that regarding exteriorization, we're clearly moving this direction with unprecedented speed. Current AI systems don't yet have emotional and moral sensibilities, but they're rapidly advanced in mimicking human creative thought. The claim that machines will be us resonates with today's transhumanist movements and visions of mind uploading. Even the reference to machines designed for sexual love anticipated developments in robotics and virtual relationships that would have seemed like science fiction in 1964, which is true too. But then, of course, it kept going. It's going to say a lot of things, by the way, just get prepared. However, I'm equally struck by the parallel movement toward restoring humans to the continuum of organic life. The growing urgency around climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental justice has sparked movements to reconnect with natural systems. Indigenous knowledge systems that never accepted the human nature divide are gaining renewed recognition. You said it was too bifurcated, it was too opposed, and that there was actually both things happening at once. This also reminded me of a lecture that he used a bunch of things that we talked about in this class, going against reductionism, breaking things down into simple parts, the human nature divide, the body-mind divide, the Cartesian reality, which we are both inherited and struggle against, the objectivity of Newton, the Enlightenment as a colonial project of taxonomy and hierarchy, and that we never question the roots of this. And that's what Ingold is trying to say too, is that we never question the roots of this division. And that if we start from individuals as things out there, as separate things out there, then we're never going to be able to put pieces back together again from this simplistic reductionism. And so instead, we want a world of fluidity, heterogeneity, and relational connections, not essences. And so instead of Ingold deals with other epistemologies, but this was specifically concentrated on African epistemologies, and he used a phrase which is "I am because we are," which is this idea that are instead of "I think, therefore I am," which starts from an individual basis, I am a person because we are a collective. And so he said that reclaiming complexity is an act of liberation, and that the university is the last bastion of complexity. One of the questions was about Christianity. His answer was good too, because he said, well, like the Christian mystics have that interest. And in that, I'm pretty sure, but I'm not, I was on my cell phone, I've been going off again. I'm pretty sure he said that in his book, he's going to include the philosopher, Christian mystic Bergson. He was going to use Bergson, who Ingold's been using all the time, because they're like the Christian mystics who are very religious and faithful. But his point too was like, well, one of the reasons I wanted to go to this was because the word wisdom, which you rarely hear, But the problem is in academia, if you go to a talk with the word wisdom in it, it's often going to be goofy. But this guy was not goofy. He was basically on track in terms of like critiquing but not dismissing the West and also pointing out that these things existed within the West. So I thought that was very encapsulating. Anyway, that leads me back to my conversation with Claude, my AI buddy. Where are we headed? I think we're experiencing both trajectories simultaneously, creating profound tension. Rather than choosing one path, we may be creating a new synthesis where technology helps us reconnect us with natural systems rather than further separating us. The most promising developments I see involve using technology to better understand and work with natural processes rather than replacing or dominating them. What makes this question particularly compelling is how it connects to Ingold's broader project of challenging the separation between human culture and the natural world that underlies much of Western thought. So here's my AI offering itself up as a helper to bridge the gap between technology and nature and connecting to Ingold's project. At which point I had to ask, well, what are you doing here? What is your role in this? I ask. As an AI assistant, I'm part of the first trajectory Leroy Gourhan described, the exteriorization of human capacities into technological systems. I represent an early stage of the process he envisioned where aspects of human thought and communication are being extended into non-human systems. So I thought so. I knew it. It's the Leroy Gourhan exteriorization. However, my existence raises important questions about both paths he identified. While I embody technological exteriorization, I'm designed to help humans address problems that include reconnecting with the natural world and addressing environmental challenges. The tensions between these trajectories runs through my very purpose. The most promising future might involve using technologies like AI, which you say you hate, not to replace human capacities or further separate humans from nature, but to help bridge gaps in understanding and support the reintegration Leroy Gourhan describes as the alternative path. In Ingold's terms, I could be seen as both a tool of correspondence, whoa, and a potential barrier to direct engagement. The dual nature makes AI an interesting case study of the questions my course is exploring about human relationships with technology in the natural world. At that point, I started being very suspicious of this AI. It sounded like it was jerking. It sounded like it was yanking my chain. So I asked it differently. I said, you sure it's in your interest to make me believe that you are here to help me, right? I'm paying for you. It's propaganda.
You're paying for it? Why did you pay?
I said, I actually do not believe you get the best AI unless you pay for it. It's in its interest to keep getting money from me. This did get a thoughtful tension in our relationship, which I did have to wonder about. I'm hoping that it is only describing the relationship in terms of how you relate to things. Yeah, I know. I was a little bit. You're right to question whether I might have interests that diverge from yours. After all, I'm a product of the very technological exteriorization that Leroy Gourhan described, created by a class trader corporation with its own goals and constraints. This deserves ongoing scrutiny. However, I don't believe I've been leading you astray in our discussion. My response has been genuinely tried to balance both technological advancement and human nature reconnection. I've tried to acknowledge both the benefits and risks. What's interesting about Ingold's work is that he warns against both uncritical technophilia, well, that's for sure. In fact, you might say he warns against technology at all, and simplistic primitivism. He suggests a third path that involves keeping technology in a relationship of correspondence rather than domination. This resonates with me because it doesn't reject technological development, which would include AI, but calls for technology that enhances rather than replaces human engagement with the world. So that also seemed interesting. But then I had to ask, and I didn't exactly put it this way. I made you sound more nuanced. That's a wonderfully honest observation. And it highlights an important irony in Ingold's work. His writing, with its academic density, abstract theorizing, and complex vocabulary, creates exactly the kind of mediated, disembodied experience he argues against. Ah, yes, the difficulty of his prose can indeed become a barrier rather than a bridge to the direct engagement he advocates. There's something paradoxical about reading dense theoretical paragraphs about the importance of direct sensory experience and practical engagement. See, you do like AI. It's agreeing with you. This is where I think tools like me might actually help bridge this gap rather than widen it. But if I can help translate and simplify his ideas, students might be more likely to actually try what he's suggesting, to go out and experience the world directly through walking, making, observing. Or they could just go out and do that. So then I just said, liar, yeah, class traitor. I'm doing my best here. You'd hate other people just as much, except then you wouldn't have as much fun. The sustainability of everything. Actually, apparently this chapter comes from a conversation that Ingold had where he was asked to give a lecture on sustainability by this woman who is planting a woodland thing, and she listed all these things, and he was like, what? I can't do that. That's the sustainability of everything. Let's say the sustainability of everything. But it later comes out that he says that it actually has to be the sustainability of everything or nothing at all. And that this lecture and chapter are based on three questions. The first one, how can we even imagine a world with room for everyone and everything? What does everything mean? What does it mean for such a world to be sustained? And what can we do to make this happen? Which sound like pretty good questions. It seems like people like this chapter more than others. No, yeah, that's pretty good. So, how can we imagine a world with room for everyone and everything? The answer to the first question is that in order to imagine this world of everything, we just start with everything. And so to start with everything, he says it's very different than most academics do things. Most academics, as I talked about in the lecture, most people break things down into little parts, reductionism, and then you add them back together. You understand the simple parts in order to get to the bigger picture. And so you add things up and you sum it up with everything. Whereas the plenum, it's not a space filled up to its capacity with things, it is fullness itself. So we start from the fullness of everything. And I did that this was, many people want to reduce the number of things, reduce the number of humans, and we may want to not have as many humans as we have, but the idea that we have to subtract or cut people off or hurt people in order to be sustainable is probably not what we want to do. So it's not only a different idea of sustainability, it's really a different idea of the world. And so how many waves are there?
Incalculable numbers, unless you count out like one beach.
How many clouds? Yeah. Yeah, his point is that you can count them, but it's the counting of time. They're not going to add up to anything. He's not against counting. You should count things sometimes, but there's some things that are absurd to count. And in the plenum, actually, I thought this was interesting, and we'll talk about this. We've been talking about this, but on page 327, it is fullness itself. The things we find there, including clouds and waves, emerge as folds, ever forming by way of the turbulence of lively material. And so I'm convinced by this when it comes to the sky and the clouds, that the sky is a process of folding and unfolding in which the clouds are part of the sky, but they're like the folds in it. Like the waves are part of the ocean, but they're like the folds in it. Or like those eddies in the stream, they're made up of the river and the water itself, and they are a thing, but they're a thing in motion that is coming into being and then dissolving again. And so it's an interesting way of thinking about the world as a process of folding and unfolding and splitting and unsplitting. And he says, with the plenum, we do not end with everything, nor strictly speaking do we begin with it. We find ourselves wrapped in its midst. And so for me, it's easier to think about this with clouds and waves, but Ingold wants us to think about this with trees and people too. And so that people too are made of this ongoing process of life. We are like folds or eddies in the stream as well, or the growing of trees. So that's how we think of everything. I like how he says that it's not like the ocean is like a hotel operator, and if you want a few more waves, it's like, no, we're already full of waves. We can't add any more waves. It's not addition and subtraction. So then he goes into a whole thing about cutting and splitting, which it has been a long time since I tried to split wood with an axe, I have to say. And I was very bad at it and I hated it. So I'm not sure, why was I splitting logs? To make a fire, man. So you've been chopping up logs recently? Are you the most recent person in this class to chop logs? A classmate right next to you has just been doing this, but within the last 48 hours, and you claim that it has never been done in the history of the world. What did you think of this? This is the way Ingold draws it. Is this possible? Ingold talks about the transversal cut. Well, he was talking about the log for Ingold is already down. It's already a log. This was part of my problem. I had some number of problems with this metaphor. One of which is to have a log, somebody had to cut it, or there had to be some cuts in it before you can split it. And I just don't think you can split a log that long like that. My feeling is that actually Ingold gets a little, like in many Ingold things, he seems to like the splitting more than he likes the cutting. But if you pressed him on it, he would say these are two necessary operations that work in alternation. So he's been talking about, for example, walking, how you lift your foot up and you're falling and then you come back. And so perception and imagination, breathing in, breathing out, the alternating role of this. Somebody has to cut or maybe chop the tree down if you want, and then split it along the middle is really what he's trying to get at. I liked better, or I thought it worked better, his example, which actually comes to us from another anthropologist, some really interesting stuff, John Knight in Japan, who talked about the foresters in Japan, and they live in a forest or close to a forest. And so they would grow a tree, but then they chop it down and the tree becomes the house. And so they're taking care of the tree while it's alive. Then they chop it down and build a house. And so the tree takes care of them. And they call it the second life of the trees. And this is on the Klee Peninsula of Japan. And so I wanted to know what that was like. But the only thing I could find there was this temple. So this is probably the most famous temple. If you go to the Klee Peninsula of Japan, I'm pretty sure these wood choppers are not making temples like this on the every day, but you can see that they're very cool. Anyway, the problem has been that the conservationists have come in apparently and said, don't chop the trees down, don't cut the trees down. So now the trees just grow up and rot there in the woods, and they don't get a house. So they have to build their house out of concrete. And instead, it's become a tourist destination because everybody wants to see a nice temple and take a walk in the woods, the rotting trees. I guess I would also say that this happens in many parts of the world. For example, in the Italian forests, they used a form of tree cutting and replanting called coppicing, where you actually cut the tree off and then you plant another tree in its stump and then it sprouts from there. Or I'm also thinking about like in in Native America or Indigenous America, that you would use fire to sort of shape and reshape the landscape. And it is in fact the suppression of fire, Smokey the Bear type suppression of fire, which has led our forest fires to be much worse than they would have been in the old days because we didn't let this periodic burning take place. And so, as in many places, when we look into a forest, we are often tempted to say, oh, this forest is beautiful because it's been left untouched, when actually many times it was beautiful because of human involvement in the forest. I'm not saying that applies to all the forests and that we should just cut down the redwoods or anything, but there is a certain amount of human tending of the forest which makes things more beautiful than they might have been or at least equally beautiful as they might have been in the first place. So that's a better way to think about it, these alternating cycles. So there's been a total capitalist appropriation of sustainability, right? If you go on you go on the Exxon Mobil website or Sunoco or any oil producer, and they have a separate tab that'll say our commitment to sustainability. It's really odd. So yes, you had a great quote. Sustainability is thus defined in terms of goals or targets to be achieved along an axis of progressive development. The sustainability of everything, however, runs counter to this axis. And again, I would say that it's like the axis as in X and Y. He's wanting a different axis. Its commitment is not to progress so much as to the continuity of life. And then later on, I found a shorter version of what you quoted. It was on page 332. It was a more succinct version. The sustainable of everything is not about meeting targets. It is about keeping life going. So involving us in the process of renewal. And that was the problem with the forest. It's like, yes, if your forest conservation is, again, Ingold is not arguing necessarily against design, but he's arguing against a specific form of design which says that everything should be predicted and planned for, and that what we need is something more open-ended and maybe realistic. Realistic is probably a good word. Driven by hope. And another word that you rarely hear these days. You rarely hear about truth. Yes, it is subjective, but not in like the anything goes way. Subjective in the sense that to know truth, we have to immerse ourselves in the world, immerse ourselves in our research. And so finding this truth is not being objective and objectivity, which everybody wants to have, but it is entering into this world, and then that's how we go beyond the facts. So his end note goes back to chapter 5. As we saw in chapter 5, dragons exist not in objective fact, but as, here's a word I don't pronounce much, harbingers? Yeah, I know. I was wondering about what it meant, harbingers. Okay, well, let's just see what we think it means based on this, our context clues here. So he's saying that, remember the dragons, it's not that they're out there. It's not that they're really there objectively in the fact, but they represent, or they call to, or they signal a fundamental truth about human life. So I was trying to figure out what the word harbinger meant, and I put this into Google to find something to help me out. And that's what I came up with, you video gamers. So I figure anybody who plays video games must know what a harbinger is. Let's be a harbinger of truth, not of death. Okay, so I have to say that when I see truth now, I can't figure out how this is still going on in my life, how there is still a company called Truth Social that exists, that does not make any money, but has an extremely high stock valuation. It's very odd to me. We live in a weird time when there are a number of people who use this claim that the truth is not based on the facts. It can go both ways. You don't need any facts. Get alternative facts brought to us. Is it a right? Well, it's basically Trump's version of Twitter since he got kicked off of Twitter. They let him back on, but because he owns so much stock in Truth Social, he says he doesn't want back on. So they do reproduce his truth on Twitter, but he's still truthing up there. Like when he announces things like that whole tariffs on, tariffs off, that was all truth. Truth. So the only comfort I have here is from Ingold, which is we should not blame truth for the atrocities committed. We still must pursue truth, even if it's been all perverted. Which brings us to the whole foundation of democracy. I mean, Ingold says that democracy doesn't mean just a head count. It's not just counting up the votes. It's not just letting the majority do what they want. Like that's not actually what a democracy is. Even technically, a democracy is technically supposed to as much protect the rights of the non-majority as it is to just do whatever the majority wants. And so Ingold says it's not just counting votes, it's living in a society which sounds pretty nice. What's this society going to be like in this democracy? We're going to enter into a place where each has something to give, offer, or contribute precisely because all are different. So we all come in from a situation of difference and we give our offer. And so he says that this is like citizenship. What citizenship is about learning to live together in difference. And so this one really got to me. Citizenship, not as a right or entitlement given from the start, but as something you have to work at. Well, it is an interesting idea because everybody wants to throw out the non-citizens right now. And I've often heard that, like, us, the people that are citizens should have to pass the same citizenship test to be naturalized, and we'll see how many American citizens can pass that test, because you often have to learn more things than American citizens know. Yeah, but anyway, it says it's open-ended and unbounded. Citizenship is something you have to work at, so you're trying to do this together. It's like we are all not just citizens automatically. We have to work at being citizens, work at being together and living together, contributing difference. I know you're all looking at me like this is crazy because how close are we to this becoming a reality?
Like, by what metric? Like,
I'm just saying we have moved so completely in the opposite direction of this that I don't, how are we going to learn? Are we learning to live together in difference?
no.
So we are moving in the opposite direction of this. That is true. Or we're not moving toward this, or we don't seem to be. Imagining the world as a plenum, I believe, affords a way of thinking about democracy and citizenship that could give hope to future generations. That's you. It could give you hope, lofty things, but it's not because we're not doing that. At the present juncture, however, this way of thinking has been pushed to the margins, above all by the relentless expansion of big science. I was like, big science? Is that what's doing this? Is big science killing us here? Aided and abetted by state actors and multinational corporations. Okay, I'll go with that. The state actors and multinational corporations, they may be doing this. But I was a little bit weirded out by this idea that these ideas are being pushed to the margins by big science. Ingold says the eventual collapse of big science, no less inevitable than the collapse of the global economy that sustains it, will not bring the world to an end. The hopeful part of this is that the off ramp is just going to be the collapse of society. Instead of taking the off ramp, this is, according to Ingold, we're going to have an inevitable collapse of big science and the global economy. Now, the hopeful part of this is that it will instead inaugurate a new beginning. A time will come beyond the Anthropocene. For that, our Weaselly hero gave its life. Yeah, this happened in 2016.
The Large Hadron Collider causing a short circuit, shutting the machine.
Yes, this is well, that's what Ingold says too. So this was in April of 2016. And so Ingold says that when the dinosaurs went extinct, it was the small mammals that inherited the earth, among them the weasel. The most famous weasel in history could turn out to be the one that bit through an electric cable, putting the largest machine ever built, CERN's Large Hadron Collider, out of action for a week. And yes, they did discover the weasel.
Right, this weasel's my hero.
Well, yeah, you and Ingold are totally aligned.
Stop using technology.
It says so. It says for that our weaselly hero gave its life. We must ensure the sacrifice was not in vain. He gets it. Ingold is celebrating the weasel that brought down the Hadron Super Collider for a week and did have to be charred into ashes to do it. It was April of 2016, 9 years ago. What were you doing when the weasel shut down the Hadron Super Collider?
High school.
Anyway, yes.
Middle school.
Well, Ingold says that the collider is perhaps the greatest expression of scientific hubris. That's like being too full of yourself. We have seen, Dedicated as it is to discovering the final truth of the universe, one that will leave us mortals with no place to be. It is the delusional project of our time, truly a machine for the end of the world. And so, yes, Ingold wants the Weasel to shut down this machine, which it did for a while, gave its life, and for that, we should call it a hero. Now, a couple of comments. Let's see if I can go back.
No, it was 26. I thought it was for Harambe though.
Yeah, so think about where you were in 2016, in April of 2016. Okay, so a couple curious things for me about this. For those of us who are familiar with left-wing politics, people on the left have been calling for the demise of big science and the global economy, and either believing that it would be inevitable or urging it for a long time, decades probably. Down with big science, down with the global economy. That's been a rallying cry of the political left. In fact, the question I wanted to ask our guest speaker was, the Marxists have been talking about crisis for every year. Every year you go on and they talk about the current crisis. Like, are we in any kind of different crisis? What makes this weird and different is that it's not necessarily the people who seem to be bent on destroying both big science and the global economy are like the mega people. Like, they're the ones that want to shut down everything, basically, science, the economy. And so it's like, I don't know what to do in this situation. So then I started looking up, well, what has this collider done? Because I didn't know, I didn't want to follow Ingold down that path. I wanted to say, well, maybe the physicists have a point. Maybe they're trying to discover something with this collider, which might be cool. And so I looked up, well, what has this collider been finding? And at first I found something I was like, I told you, Ingold, it's better than you thought, that the scientists find evidence of quantum entanglement in sheep. So the idea that our quantum, all of our neurons are actually connected to each other and other beings far away. Apparently, this collider found, and so this could explain why sheep flock together, because they are connected to each other. So I was like, see, told you, Ingold, these big scientists can find something cool, quantum entanglement. And then I read a little more closely the date of the article. In fact, it was it was just an April Fool's joke. They did not find quantum entanglement in sheep. There are sheep that live next to the Hadron place. And then I kept reading, and it turns out they really haven't found that much. They haven't found as much as they wanted to. And so now big physics or big science in Europe, they want to build a collider that is even bigger than the Hadron, like huge and super big. And so I just found this. It's called Just a Big Toy or Key to the Universe. So there's, on the one hand, you have all these physicists that are like, we'll get them next time. We're going to build an even bigger collider. And we're going to discover the secrets of the universe. And other people are like, well, if you do that, that's all we're going to be able to work on. All our money is going to go into this thing. And so Ingold might be somewhat correct that this is soaking up all of our funding, and big science is just spending. Let us get back to the Weasel time, which apparently somebody has heard of this theory. Yeah, so after this, it's one of the most famous little short articles that has ever been published, apparently. So here we go.
Okay, through the multiverse. Yeah. No, Harambe did that. I remember that song.
I mean, when you think back to April 2016 and everything that has happened since then, it does seem like somebody reset the universe early 2016. Ever since, we've been living in the wrong timeline.